We just double closed a wholesale deal this morning, and I've been getting a lot of questions about double closings. When should I double close? What is it? How do you do it? All of those things. So I thought I'd make this video real quick to talk to you guys about what I recommend and what we do inside of my business to double close on properties. So what is a double closing? If you got a wholesale deal, so you got a house under contract and you're selling that contract to somebody else, basically a double closing is instead of assigning that contract, you're actually closing on it. So the A to B closing, you're buying that property and immediately turning around and selling it to somebody else. You actually take title for a quick second. And so with that, there's a lot of factors that come into play before I answer what should I do. So a lot of investors will say, wholesalers will say, hey, what should I do? What do you recommend? The fee is this. And I have a lot more questions. So let me start with some of that. We just left the double closing this morning. So we bought a property. It was some triplexes for $550,000. We're selling them for $600,000. And it was a new title company. It was a new buyer. It was a antsy seller, just not really comfortable working with us and stuff like that. So we thought the best thing to do would be to double close on this property to make sure that it's clean, that there's no issues. We actually sent somebody to the closing. So Chad, on his birthday, actually drove down to Huntsville to take care of this deal and sit at the closing. And he even said there were some issues at the closing table too, even when we were double closing. So what we did was I sent $550,000 down there, plus closing costs and all the other things that we needed. And then we'll be getting wired the difference. So we actually bought the property for a minute, and then we turned around and sold it to the buyer at a different closing. So two separate HUDs, a full transaction where we actually take down the property and own it for a minute. And we had to send the money in this case. So there's a lot of factors that are involved that I'm going to talk through right now. So when do you double close? So things that I need to ask first are, what is your location? So what are the costs to double close? Depending on where you are, we have people that are all around the United States that listen to podcasts or in the mastermind groups, all of these things. And then we have people overseas too. So what is it going to cost you to double close? Because the answer might be very simple if it's only going to cost you $150 to double close a transaction. It might be a very different answer if you're in New York or New Jersey potentially, and it's going to cost you $5,000 or $6,000 to double close versus a sign. So that's a huge factor. What are the costs? And you can just ask your title company what those costs are. Go to your title company and say, hey, this is what I'm doing. I'm wholesaling, and we are typically assigning properties, but what would it cost for me to buy this property and then turn around and resell it to somebody else a minute later? And so that's the first step. Then the next question is, okay, I see those costs. Do I have to bring my money to the table or use transactional funding? So somebody else's money that they just give it to you for an hour? Or can I use the buyer's money? So can the buyer, let's use my case for example, can the buyer bring their $600,000 in? We use that money to buy my contract, so I purchase it using that money. And then we close the second one using the same money and we get the difference. So I've had title companies tell me that that's illegal. You can't do it. We aren't allowed to do it. All of those things. Just keep asking different title companies until you find the one that will do it, because it's not illegal. We do it all the time in our states. There are some states or locations or things like that where they might not be able to do it. So check around, ask other investors that are around you, but we do this all the time. So we use the buyer's money to close the front end transaction if we need to, and then we close the second one where we're selling it to the end buyer. And so if that's the case, then you don't even need the money. So the costs will determine whether you should do this or not. And that's one of the factors, right? So what's the cost? So the administrative costs. So you might have some title fees. You've got, you might have some taxes to pay. You might have insurance policies, things like that. There's a couple different factors in that cost. So I know a couple people inside of our mastermind group where it only costs them $150 or $200 to double close. And that seems like a no-brainer to me, especially if it's a little, if they're uncertain about who the buyer and the seller are. So that's one step. What are the costs? The second one is, whose money am I using? Because that increases the costs. Transactional funding is anywhere from maybe like 1% to 1.5% of the amount. So in my case, I used my money. I lent my $550,000 to the company, and I only charged them 0.5% to use my money. So I was making somewhere around, $2,750, somewhere around there, $2,800. And they had to build that into the fees and the cost to double close that property. So my company decided that it made sense to double close it. They thought they were going to lose the deal. So they borrowed the money. So if you don't have to use that money, you can use the buyer's money. That price would have gone down significantly and become more of a no-brainer. So the cost to double close, whose money can I use? So then the next question is, what is the issue that you're trying to avoid? So a lot of times people say, well, I don't want the buyer to see how much money we're making on the deal. We have a really big deal, and maybe we're buying it for $220 and we're selling it for $250, and I don't want the buyer to see that we're making $30,000. Well, my answer to that is that really an issue? Do you really think that the buyer cares? And if they do, why? And are they even ever going to see it until they get to the closing table? So are they going to sit down at the closing table, have their money wired in there already, and then look at this HUD and say, I'm not buying this for what I originally agreed to buy it for? So do they have non-refundable earnest money that's down, that non-refundable deposit? So we require a non-refundable deposit of $5,000. So if they walk away from that deal, they're losing $5,000. Yes, we can't get the deal closed right then without jumping through hoops, but are they really going to balk on that? And is it worth paying $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 to protect your $30,000 fee? And so ask yourself those questions. Typically, the buyer is usually the only person that's going to see this. And so I don't think the buyer is a big issue. I think the seller is more of an issue. So if the seller sees that you're making $30,000, that could be a potential issue. And so when you think about that, think about the psychology that's happening here, and they're going to be sitting down at the table. And typically the buyer doesn't even look at the assignment fee because it's on, or I'm sorry, the seller doesn't even look at the assignment fee because it's on the buyer's side of the closing. So even if the HUDs are right there, they're looking at their side. They're not looking at the buyer's side. So the buyer's going to see the fee as the assignment fee on the closing, and the seller doesn't usually see it. So this stuff can be avoided, and just look at your costs. So that's like, what are you trying to avoid? Are you trying to avoid the buyer balking? Are you trying to avoid the seller seeing how much you're making? We've had deals where we've bought a property for $40,000 and we've assigned it for a $30,000 fee. And a lot of times I'll double close something like that because the seller might see that and see the purchase price of the home on the HUD as $70,000 and start asking some questions. When it's a $200,000 purchase and we're making $30,000, $40,000, I'm going to try to assign contracts as much as possible. I want to reduce my fees and keep as much in my pocket as I can. So the other question you have to ask is, will the title company or attorney split the HUDs? So the buyer only sees the buyer side, so they'll only see the assignment fee on there, and the seller will only see their side of the HUD. And we call that a blind HUD. So we do that all the time too, where we actually split the HUDs, and that way the seller sees the seller side and the buyer sees the buyer side. And that's simple. So they will only see the fees that are on their side. So then I only have to worry about the buyer. The seller won't see anything. And we try to do that as much as possible. So if you're working with a title company, you can ask them if they'll do that. Can you split the HUDs where it's blank on one side and they see the other? So that's typically what we do. So what is my take on this? I don't have a cutoff of 20,000, 30,000, 100,000 where we're going to double close or not. So if somebody asks me like, hey, when do you double close? My answer is it depends on all of those factors we talked about. What are the costs? What are the fees? What are we trying to avoid? What's the issue? So I push my team to assign contracts whenever possible because number one, it's cheaper. We're going to keep more money in our pocket. So we'll net more money on that transaction. Number two is it's much better on our taxes. When you get into the tax burden of having all these HUDs, buying, selling properties, all these fees, all those things, it is a challenge when it comes to tax time. We do almost 200 deals a year. If I can assign all of those, it becomes so much easier. It's just a commission income line for us on our books, and it's not, I have to produce all of these HUDs for my CPA. We have to keep them in record and in inventory, and we have to own it. The other thing is, what happens if I close on the property and then the buyer doesn't close? So the buyer has some problems, doesn't wire their money, decides not to buy it. Now I own that property. And so there's a lot of challenges that come with that, even just for a very short period of time. So I'm actually taking a chain of title. So I think about all that stuff. I really push to assign if we can. And I tell my team, why can't we assign it? Like we got to work through that to figure out why not. And for us, it usually costs us, anywhere from $500-$600 to in the low $1,000 range, $2,000 range to assign. If we're using transactional funding, it might be even more. Like I talked about on this one today, it probably cost us $7,000 to assign to double close on that property to make that $50,000. So we're walking away with $43,000 instead of $50,000. Not ideal. I would much rather have that $7,000 back, but we didn't think that we were going to get this deal done if we didn't do it. And so we tried everything. We worked through all the different scenarios. Didn't make sense, so we double closed it. And fortunately, I was able to fund it, and it wasn't as expensive as going out to another traditional transactional funding company. So think about all those things, and just, you come up with your plan in your area. What's the best for you? What's the smartest thing to do? And I wouldn't be as concerned. A lot of it is our mindset. Our mindset is dictating what we think we should do. So if you're worried about the buyers caring, like I bought lots of properties. I don't care what the wholesaler is making. I will say that when I see the assignment fee, I usually say, hey, that's great for them. Or I start to go, man, I probably could have gotten a little bit better deal on this maybe. But I'm not going to walk away from the deal. Like I put my pen to paper. I put my name on that contract. I said that I would buy it at the amount that they are asking for it. And that's my commitment. So just upgrade your buyer network. Make sure that you're dealing with actual cash buyers. Typical cash, like real good cash buyers, they don't care how much you make. Like they're not counting I don't go back to the house once they fixed it up and are selling it or renting it out and saying, hey, you made more money than you said you were going to make. You owe me more money. Like I don't count their money afterwards. They shouldn't count mine now. And they should know that I'm providing them a service. Like if they want to continue to work with me, then they should love the fact that I'm making a $30,000 assignment fee. It means I can go spend more money on marketing. I can start building my team. I can find them more deals. We can do more business together. So change your mindset, change the way that you think about that stuff. But that's my answer. When do you double close? Obviously, it depends. There's a lot of factors involved in this. You go through the costs, go through where's the money coming from. Can I split the HUDs? What am I worried about, the buyer or the seller? Why am I worried about that? Is it all in my head, or is it true? Is it really the fact that they're not going to buy? Do they have a non-refundable deposit down that they're probably not going to walk away from anyway? If there's risk involved of the deal not closing, sometimes it makes sense to double close. I want to assign as many contracts as possible. I want to reduce my double closings as much as possible. There are people out there that double close every transaction, and that's just what they do, and that's their model, and that's their business, and they got to build in those costs and fees into their model. For me, I want to net as much as possible. I want to put as much money in my pocket as the business owner as possible, keep my business profitable, keep my business in good financial standing, and keep doing deals. So hopefully this helps. When do you double close? What is double closing? And if you guys like this video, if you like these podcasts that we do, if you like everything that's going on here at Seven Figure Flipping, please just subscribe, rate and review everything. Let us know what you're thinking. If there's any other questions that you have that you want me to answer of what we do inside of my company or what I think about it, send it over to us. I'd be happy to answer it. I love doing this stuff, and I want to provide as much value to you as possible. I'll see you guys on the next one.